let's talk about another symptom that can happen in dementia but rarely gets talked about. When someone with dementia has this symptom, it can make it incredibly dangerous for everyday common household objects to be around. It can also lead to some pretty embarrassing situations in public. Let's see if this is a symptom your loved one with dementia might have. It's called utilization behavior. Have you ever heard of this before? Other names it might be called include magnetic apraxia, imitation behavior, or compulsive utilization behavior. Utilization behavior is the compulsive and automatic use of objects that are within reach, regardless of the situation or context. Basically, a person loses their ability to inhibit a behavior when an object is presented. Right now, for most of us watching this, we inhibit our behaviors on a daily, ongoing basis. We're able to control what we do and what comes out of our mouth. So that, let's say, for example, a super good-looking person passes in front of you, you are not going to just put your arms around them and hug them. You would let them walk past. Or if you're at a restaurant and a waiter walks by with a delicious-looking plate of food and they're headed to a table, you're not going to put your hand on that plate and eat it, because you realize that's not an appropriate behavior for the situation. Even if that food smelled and looked delicious and you would like a taste of it, you don't do it. That's because we are able to inhibit our behavior. We basically can control our urges. Another way this might look is if you are at a formal function and your boss says something that you don't like, you can stop yourself from saying out loud what you're thinking in your head. So people who have utilization behavior, which is something that can happen in dementia, this is damage to the frontal lobes of the brain, and they lose their ability to inhibit their behavior, which means they are doing and saying things in certain situations that they just can't control. And it's called utilization behavior because they're basically utilizing whatever is presenting in front of them, whatever is in their sight. It's almost like a magnet drawing them in to do something with it or to use it. Here's how it can look for somebody who has dementia. A person with dementia sees something and it's almost like they're pulled to it, which is why sometimes you hear it called magnetic apraxia. It's like a magnet. They're being pulled to that object. And then basically they just pick it up and begin to use it. Now, they might use the object totally wrong. So for example, they might be sitting down at a dinner and they might pick up a fork and they might start running the fork through their head or through their hair. And so that's obviously not an appropriate use of a fork. However, the fork was in their line of sight. They picked it up and they started using. So that's one way utilization behavior can show up. The other way is that they know how to use the fork and what it's for, and they pick up the fork and start using it appropriately. However, it's not an appropriate situation. So for example, let's say they're still at a dinner table and the person next to them sets down their fork. Well, if it's in the line of sight of that person with dementia, with utilization behavior, they might pick up the other person's fork and start eating with it, with that other person's fork. Now you can imagine just how difficult this type of behavior could be for family members in the role of trying to explain or help the situation, especially if the family member is out in public and there are strangers around who don't know that the person with dementia has this condition or that the person even has dementia. Now, the symptom can also be quite dangerous. So let's say the person with dementia is walking through a hardware store and there is some sort of heavy machinery or even a saw or a hammer. They can just start picking it up and start using it. Or something that might be more common is the person with dementia sees medications that are on the counter, and so they just take them. Whether or not those medications are theirs or they've already taken their pills for the day, they see it, they take it. So what can you do if you suspect your loved one has this condition? In fact, let me know, do you think your loved one might have utilization behavior? You can leave it in a comment below. If you do, there are 2 things we can do to try to work with this. Obviously, it goes without saying, please keep your loved one's healthcare provider up to date and informed of any symptoms you're noticing. But the very first thing we can do is environmental control. Basically, we modify the environment and do what we can to remove move or secure potentially dangerous items. These are going to be things like hazardous materials, medications, sharp objects, anything we think could pose a danger to them. We want to try to minimize their exposure to that. And the second thing, which of course is super difficult, is supervision and ongoing monitoring of the person with dementia. If they have this condition, it's probably quite dangerous for them to be alone in a room for any length of time, especially if there are things around that are dangerous. This is going to be especially true in environments like kitchens, workshops, garages. Now, if you think your loved one might have utilization behavior, what makes you think that? What have you observed that makes you think, yeah, I think my loved one has this condition? And we will in the future do a full video on the frontal lobes of the brain and executive functioning, because that's where a lot of really challenging, strange, confusing, difficult behaviors happen, such as utilization behavior. And as always, Careblazer, if you're interested in joining a supportive community that comes together every single week for support groups, live question and answer sessions with experts such as myself and elder law attorneys and board certified neuropsychologists, I really invite you to click on the link in the description to learn more about our Care Collective, because learning all this information is wonderful and it's a great first step, but knowing how to work through the emotions of responding to these behaviors is an entirely different thing, and that's what we do every single day together inside of the Care Collective. Careblazer, I'm sending you so much love. I'll be back next week with a new video. Bye.
Also, Nico gets a belly rub for every person who subscribes from this video. So if you haven't already, click the red subscribe button. It's totally free, and Nico says thank you very much.